Well, this is Murray Marshall. I retired as a flight lieutenant, and my number in the Air Force at the time was 11068, J 11068. That's Marshall.
You can go ahead.
Just keep talking.
Sure thing. Yeah.
Well, my story, I suppose, starts at a very tender age. My father had a farm in Ancaster. The area is now long paved over, housed over. But he had a chap come along one day, said, "Can we use a field? We want to do some barnstorming." So part of the deal was a couple of kids got a free ride in an airplane. That I would suppose it was middle to late 20s, maybe 28. I don't know exactly, but I thought it was quite a thrill to get up in this open aircraft. And a couple of years later, I think we had an airfield because there was an airplane used to fly daily from east to west. They said it was a mail plane. Well, he ran into bad weather and he sat down in this airfield again, just a pasture really. Come in and had lunch with us. When the weather improved, he was gone. But that sort of spiked an interest in me in airplanes. Then come along the war. I'm in high school. I said, well, I get my grade 13, I'll join the Air Force. This was coming up into 41. So there was three of us decided we'll beat the system. We'd start out. We went down to the recruiting office on James Street South. I think it was probably February or March. The idea being the Air Force takes us in now. We won't have to write grade 13 exams. Well, it worked great for the other two guys, but I got in there and the doctor doing the medical says, well, we can't take you now. You got a slight what's that? Hernia on the left side. You'll have to get that fixed. So I went home, talked to my father. It was agreed that I'd go in the hospital in the Easter break and have this hernia fixed. Well, as luck would have it, I got infection or something went wrong, and I had a real problem for a while. I got out of the hospital, finally, time enough to go back to school and write the final exams. No time for review. That was shot. 2 days or 3 days after I finished the last exam, I got a notice from the Air Force to report. So I got outsmarted on that one. So anyway, we started from Hamilton down to the cow barns and the exhibition grounds. And that was quite an experience. We had a lot of Americans there come up to Canada, and they were a noisy bunch. And banner that went back and forth from the north and the south. Some of the comments I'll refrain from speaking. Anyway, we had our initial shots, of course. Everybody goes in the service has to get lots of needles stuck into them. And we were taught we had to do guard duty. So many people who had never had a gun in the hand in their life were taking out the Long Branch rifle range, all lined up there and given a 303. Very cursory and what am I trying to say? Instruction, yeah. Anyway, I still laugh. I saw some fellas shutting their eyes and banging away. But this is our training to handle a 303. It scares me now when I think about it, because they would be put on guard duty out around a certain perimeter. There would be a young pilot officer, administrative type, the sergeant of the guard, come around, and you were supposed to say, "Halt, who goes there?" And he was supposed to say, "Orderly officer, advance and be recognized." Well, I was a nervous kid. I've got a loaded gun in my hand. Here this guy coming up towards me, and he's probably more nervous than I am. But that's the way it was done. I got out of Manning Depot, and they sent a shipment of us up to Rockcliffe to do guard duty. And more of the same nonsense. I remember we had two groups there, one aircrew, a potential aircrew, and the other were general duty airmen. And they took 12 hours of the day, and we took 12 hours and shifted back and forth. I think they got bored because they've been doing this for quite some time. And we had some aircraft in the field we were told were highly secret, and they had to be watched very carefully. I think there were bowling brooks with guns being fitted under the fuselage, something like that. Well, anyway, in the middle of the night, one of these boys fired off a shot. Well, that started everything. The guards called out, and we all go roaring down the hill to see what's the problem. The guard officer is in charge of all of us. He's out there. It's rainy and muddy, and this thing goes, all hell broke loose. But nobody saw. It's wonder nobody got shot, but that was the highlight of 6 weeks of guard duty. Finally got shipped out of there down to Victoriaville to ITS. Well, this is a new ball game. I suppose the prime job of the ITS was firstly to sort us out in terms of what aircrew position we could best fill. Like everybody, I suppose, wanted to be a pilot. It seemed that way. And one thing that seemed to govern a lot of the selection is whether you could fly a link trainer manually. A little coordination was required, but it wasn't too much. Anyway, selections were made. We were put through. I remember the training included taking a Browning machine gun and taking it apart and reassembling it in the dark. Now, what that proved, I'm not quite sure, but that was the way it was done. Eventually, we got out of that, and I was fortunate. I made the pilot lineup, which is what I wanted. I'd have been a lousy navigator. I couldn't write very well. So, pilot contingent, we were sent up to Goderich to start flying. Well, that was pretty straightforward. I thought fleet pinches, and I was really enjoying it. I think I had more trouble keeping straight on the takeoff than I did in the landing, but under 7 hours, my instructor told me I was set to go have a go. So it was a grass field. There was no runways. We taxied down to what I thought was the downwind side of the field, turned around, and took off. I was just nicely in the air, maybe up 300 or 400 feet, and just out of the side of my eye, I can still see that aircraft. We were converging. We both were on our first flight, different instructors, and we avoided the calamity. We were good friends after that. But that was the only incident that happened. I just enjoyed every minute of it. And when we got through, I was sent down to Brantford to service flying school on ensigns. That again, I found reasonably uneventful. I can't think of anything particular that went wrong. It was pretty straightforward. I do remember that they had one of the older ensigns where you had to crank up the undercarriage, something like 130 turns in the crank to lift the wheels. The CO had come home and grabbed one of us, and he decided he wanted to fly. We were taken up to do the hand cranking. By the time he got it up, he'd had enough, and he'd come back to the airfield and he'd start cranking them down. Fortunately, the aircraft that we flew, it was one of the original ensigns. The ones we had were a little more modern. It had, I don't know, it was electric or hydraulic devices for lifting the wheels. But other than that, I had nothing much to report. When we got through there, I was sent down to.
That's your wings. Yeah.
Oh yes, I shouldn't forget that. 10th of April, I got my wings and made a pilot officer. Just a small remark there. We hardly knew which way is up. They didn't have time to train you to be an officer. They made you an officer, and then you learned how to be one later. And didn't have the luxury of proper training in that regard. But it all worked out. After a bit of leave, I was sent down to Dunville to convert on to Harvard's. We had a short time of indoctrination in Harvard, a little ground school at the base at Dunville, and then we were sent over to the relief field at Welland to do the flying. There was a chap there who I understood had pulled a black of some kind doing something at an air show, and his punishment was to go over to Welland and train. There was 3 of us come in there. Well, that fellow was Dave Goldberg. I knew who Dave was from Hamilton in high school. He was older, but I know who he was. And we just got along great. We decided he was out one night. We have a little surprise for him, and we were rigging his bed up so it would collapse as soon as he touched it. Suddenly we looked up, and there's Dave standing there watching it all. He just said, "Well, that's great, now you can put it together."